Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, Moby.
And welcome to another episode of Moby Pod. That's my NPR voice. Do you think I'd...
Yeah, it was kind of like breathy and surprising.
So today... today, first of all, I love doing our podcast.
So do I.
We get to have, like, in-depth conversations with each other. We get to be serious. We get to be ridiculous. And today, I think people are going to be very surprised by our conversation with Stevo.
I was at a very tender age when Jackass came to be a very popular program. And so I kind of grew up with the Jackass guys in a way. And it's very specific what they do there. So I wasn't necessarily expecting to sit down with Stevo and have such a gentle, thoughtful, and honestly really moving conversation. But it kind of happened.
I mean, I would imagine anyone who's seen the Jackass movies and has seen Stevo, like, getting a tattoo in a dune buggy driving through the desert. Like people think of Stevo as being this, like, remarkable, loud, daredevil lunatic. Mm-hmm. And the conversation we had with Stevo that we're going to play in just a second was so thoughtful. I mean, about spirituality, about mortality, about existentialism, about sobriety, and about animal rights. Because one of the ways I first bonded with Stevo is he is a very sort of sensitive, compassionate animal rights activist. Mm-hmm. So should we just jump right in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, great. Hi, Stevo.
Hey, Moby.
So I have a lot of stuff I want to go through with you. Biographical stuff, clown stuff, testicle stapling stuff.
I like it.
And sobriety and bottoming out and animal sanctuaries. So there's a lot that I want to talk about.
Good.
But there are two things I would first like to address. One is punk rock, but the other is London Bridge.
Good.
Can I tell a story before we jump in?
Yeah.
Because it's a funny story.
Before we jump in.
Yeah.
So a couple weeks ago, Lindsay was in the UK and she sent a picture of herself by London Bridge. And I said, look, I don't want to be a pedantic dick, but the truth is I love being a pedantic dick. And I said, actually, that's Tower Bridge. And the next day you jumped off of Tower Bridge and almost went to jail for it.
I think it's been more like a week and a half.
It was very recent.
Very recent.
And you didn't go to jail, though.
I didn't go to jail. I didn't even get a ticket. I was detained by police. And they cited their major concern, aside from wasting resources, which didn't necessarily seem necessary. I mean, I was okay. I was out of the water. Like, hey, guys, let's move on with our day. But their main concern was that people apparently jump off the Tower Bridge in efforts to take their own lives.
Whoa.
Which strikes me as tall enough.
Right. Strikes me as woefully inefficient.
Yeah.
Apparently the height of the bridge is not the concern, but rather the current of the river.
Oh.
Apparently at certain tides, like the top of the water is flowing one way and the deeper water is flowing the other way and it'll catch you. I don't know. It didn't seem very turbulent of a current to me. But yeah, not to make light of it, but they were concerned. They said just in the prior week that 3 people had jumped off the bridges to try to take their own life and one of them was successful.
Whoa.
Wow. Well, I'm glad that you were not number 4.
Yeah.
Did you, before you jumped, do you have to do a ton of research to make sure, like, how deep is it? At what point do I jump to make sure that you don't land on a rock or land in a shallow part?
I had jumped off that bridge almost exactly 20 years prior. Whoa. So this was more of a reboot. And they got big boats going through there. I see big boats and I kind of don't trip about how deep it is.
Right.
As I said, Lindsay had texted me. She was in the UK with her boyfriend and there was a picture and she said, look, London Bridge. And I got to put on my super annoying, petty, pedantic hat and say, actually, that's Tower Bridge. So London Bridge, the original London Bridge, is not in the UK. So here's what happened. Here's the funny story that I think is funny. So a wealthy real estate businessman in Arizona agreed to buy London Bridge in the 19th century.
Was it in London at that point?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he bought London Bridge and had it shipped over stone by stone to Lake Havasu, Arizona. The problem was when it arrived, he thought he was buying Tower Bridge. So the original London Bridge, it's just kind of a generic bridge. So he spent all his time and money buying London Bridge, thinking he was going to get that remarkable quintessential Tower Bridge. And it shows up, and this is, the 19th century, I think. So like obviously the logistics of dismantling a bridge, shipping it across the world, setting it up in Arizona. So it's still there. It's in Lake Havasu, Arizona, London Bridge that he bought. And it's just a generic stone bridge.
I wonder if that's why London Bridge was falling down.
I think, isn't that something plague related?
It feels like it could be. But also I wonder if like the energy of that bridge made Lake Havasu such a party zone.
So I just think it's funny. This poor guy thinking he's buying gigantic, remarkable, beautiful Tower Bridge. Instead he gets like a gray, generic, boring bridge.
Serves him right.
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of the UK.
Yeah.
So in my research, getting ready for today, I realized you were born in the UK.
Yep.
And then here's both statement and a question.
Okay.
According to the internets, which are never mistaken, you're born in the UK, you moved to Brazil.
Yep.
You moved to Venezuela.
Yep.
You moved to my hometown of Darien, Connecticut.
Yep.
You moved to Miami. You moved back to the UK. You moved to Canada. You moved back to the UK, all by age 12.
13.
Okay.
Yeah, 13 when I moved back to the UK, yeah.
So I know, Lindsay, you also had a peripatetic upbringing, maybe not quite Brazil, Venezuela, UK, Canada, Miami, et cetera, et cetera.
We weren't very international, but yeah, we moved constantly.
Like
up until I have never really stopped moving every like 3 or 4 years. I've been in LA for like 7 now, which is a record.
So having been moved around so much, how, if at all, do you think it affected you psychologically, emotionally?
I think that, clearly I became an attention whore. And I don't...
Attention enthusiast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
An attention enthusiast. And I don't know that I attribute that to the moving. I think I do attribute that to my parents not necessarily supervising me so much. The reason why we moved was because Dad was a very successful corporate executive for multinational American corporations, and they were balling. When we moved to Brazil, I was 6 months old, and Dad was the president of Pepsi Cola in all of Brazil, and I spoke my first words in Portuguese because I was raised by live-in maids.
Wow.
Can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah.
You know what's sort of funny about that? Some friends of mine who were these globe-trotting, glamorous people ended up having an accidental baby. I'm not saying you were accidental.
Yeah.
But they had this accidental baby and they were panicking because they're like, okay, on one hand, we think having a child could be really good for us and our image. Because I guess they were like, okay, publicly we're ready to be parents now. We think that would look good on the pages of Tatler or Architectural Digest. So they had the child and immediately handed it off to a nanny and ignored the child for the first 2 or 3 years. When the child started speaking, it spoke with an almost indecipherably thick Jamaican accent because the only person who had spoken to the child for the first 2 or 3 years was the Jamaican nanny. So like when it started speaking, it sounded like a Rasta. So,
yeah, a little bit like that. I spoke my first words in Portuguese. And I don't remember anything. I do remember Darien a little bit. That's where I went to kindergarten. And
did you go to Tokenique?
If I heard the name of the school, I probably would remember it.
Royal?
Maybe Royal Academy.
There's Royal. Cause I went to Royal, which is Royle. And there's Royal, Tokenique, Hindley.
Yeah, I can't say with certainty what it is. But what I know for sure is that I was attention seeking, but more than that, I was just palpably uncomfortable in my own skin, desperately wanted to be accepted and praised, and was just kind of overwhelming in my way of going about trying to be accepted and praised. And like I really was bouncing off the walls. There was actually a really crazy story when I got to Venezuela, 2 years old, and we moved to Venezuela. And apparently the very first day of nursery school, my mom picked me up, and the nursery school staff, they said, what was the word? They said that your son is a Spanish word, not
capybara.
No. Incredible, or there's some word that in Spanish means like the most horrific, terrible thing, but it sounds like in English. Why can't I?
Kind of like how in Spanish embarazada means pregnant, I believe.
Yeah, I remember too in the Blackfish documentary. It was there was a woman speaking Spanish who was describing what it was like to have seen her son was like just torn apart by an orca, and the adjective she described for that experience was the same adjective that these nursery school teachers described me.
Like that's a horrifying thing.
Yeah,
and also, and that's how they were describing you. As a
2-year-old.
Yeah. Like,
what were you doing?
Why can't I think of this word?
I mean, did you like set nuns on fire or something?
I mean, I was a lot. I was a lot.
Just like hyperactive, or were you destructive?
I'm not sure what the qualifying behavior was. but yeah, I was a lot. I almost had it.
Hold on.
And then as you got older, because you and I have a lot of similarities, but I also was kind of in a weird way desperate, what I'll think of as like dynamic attention.
Yeah.
Like I remember, I think it was my 7th birthday. I felt like I wasn't getting enough attention from the friends at the birthday party. So I did what any 7-year-old would do, is I took off all my clothes and made my friends chase me naked around the yard.
Nice.
Because that to me, I was like, okay, how can I liven things up a little? How can I get the attention? How can I be on the receiving end of what I feel like I deserve on my special day? So I just got naked and ran around, which seems like maybe not as chaotic and destructive as being banned at 2 years old from a Venezuelan nursery school. But
did you think of the word?
I would need like a Spanish thesaurus, but in any case, every couple of years we would move. And, I think a lot of kids might be upset that they would be, uprooted and moved into a new school in a new city in a new country. But I remember every time receiving a word that we were going to move yet again, I was really happy about that, because invariably I would show up, rub everybody the wrong way, like really create problems. And whenever I got the chance to move, I thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to have a fresh start. I'm going to start over, and this time I'm going to be cool. this time I'm going to be a winner. I'm going to be cool. And then, as we know, geographic changes. It's like everywhere I went, there I was.
Yeah.
And the same thing happened over and over again.
So the other thing, when I was doing my research, and I saw that, so am I correct in thinking or assuming that in terms of citizenship, you might have 3
national, triple national.
So Canada, UK, and American, which I'm so jealous. I'm so desperate to not have American citizenship. Like when I meet someone who has UK or Canadian citizenship and they live in the United States, my first question is, what the fuck are you doing here? Like this, like when you could live in Canada, which is so like smart and enlightened and everyone's nice and people don't shoot each other at concerts as much.
Right.
Or the UK, where it's like the summers are cool, and granted it's dysfunctional, but compared to the United States, it's like this bastion of civilization and reason. I just don't understand why anyone would live in the United States if they don't have to live here.
Yeah. It's a good point. I think that being the way that I am, my life felt, in retrospect, like just an agonizing wait to get to LA. I just wanted because the things that I loved, skateboarding, I want to be a stuntman, rock and roll, it's all LA, it's all Southern California. And man, I love Southern California. I hate that California is falling apart the way that it is. Now, you mentioned animal sanctuaries. My lady and I, our highest goal is to employ hundreds of people to take care of thousands of animals. And this is just what we want to do. And the question is where to do it. And being that I'm Canadian, British Columbia sounds really good.
As far as a place to ride out the climate apocalypse, British Columbia is looking pretty nice.
Is it though? I'm not.
Moby's an expert on where to be for the apocalypse. He's done a lot of research.
You like the Pacific Northwest? It's very fiery.
Yeah, but I feel like there's no good place. The only good places are like Scotland, but that's obviously quite far away. So I don't know, the Pacific Northwest, it's like, yeah, they do have fires, but generally speaking, like the winters are fairly mild. The summers are also fairly mild. And I guess what you have is like you're living in the United States, you're living in Southern California, but you know that if you needed to move to Canada or the UK, you could.
Yeah.
As opposed to me with my panicky anxiety, I'm stuck here. And Lindsay, I don't want to speak on your behalf because maybe you're a little more comfortable with the United States than I am, but I feel like having that safety valve, that ability to live in a better country makes living here a little more comfortable. Or should I just stop talking?
Having a release valve, I'm sure, gives a little bit of comfort. It's not something that I really think about very much, only because all of my life and family and friends are in the United States. But also, how hard is it to get up? Can you go over there and just be there? Don't you have to be there for?
It's not. I trust me, I've looked into it. Like if you want to get their version of a green card or citizenship, oh boy.
It's hard.
Yeah.
There are places where you can get them, though, if you buy real estate. Then
sure, there are places. And I watched a video about this. I think Belize is a really good one for as far as easy to get citizenship goes. Plus, the national language is English. There's a lot of good reasons for Belize.
Is Spain one of them? No.
Portugal. A lot of people moved to Portugal. A lot of people moved to the former Eastern Bloc that's now part of the EC, like Romania, Bulgaria, because
Lithuania.
then you move to these countries and then you get EC membership.
Right.
We're looking at Tennessee now, Nashville area. You get so much more for your money, so much more. Yeah, I've been there.
You have?
Yeah. I've been there.
So a sanctuary. So this sort of ties into my dilettantish psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
So you describe, and I love the word peripatetic, which means moving around a lot, I think. Hopefully I'm using that word right and not just sounding like an idiot in public.
You could be. I cannot check you on that.
Okay.
I guess I could Google it,
so
but I just don't want to.
Peripatetic, I think it means a wandering sort of nomadic lifestyle. So you had this peripatetic upbringing, and now your goal is to be anchored at an animal sanctuary.
Yeah.
And to me, I feel like they're, again, I'm being both presumptuous and obvious, but growing up, going all over the world, becoming an addict and an alcoholic, touring constantly, having this chaotic existence. The opposite of that is living with thousands of animals at an animal sanctuary.
Right.
Does that make sense, or am I just...
I think that is a valid observation. I think that the way that I imagine, I have kind of two visions of what our animal sanctuary might look like. In one sense, it's a tourist destination kind of a thing with my narcissistic Stevo museum called Disgraceland. And it's got built-in revenue streams where, bed and breakfast, whatever, so that it can be more self-sustaining.
Yeah, because the economics of animal sanctuaries, it's very challenging.
Tough one, yeah. So having built-in revenue streams, to whatever extent we can make it an attraction to bring in people and money. That's one version of it. Then the other version of it is more of a prepper, kind of a bug out, disappeared to it, and have it be maybe motivated by that one documentary, The Biggest Little Farm, this sort of sustainable ecosystem of where everything kind of
homesteading, where it's you have everything that you need right on the property.
Grow our own food, with all the animals. Maybe there's some kind of a hybrid of both. But
I would think so. I mean, the idea of having, why not and again, what do I know? But like have like a clown college and a performing arts thing. Have your Disgraceland.
Yeah.
So people would come and visit, have it be an animal sanctuary, but also why not have a subterranean concrete bunker for when things go wrong? You know, it seems like you could relatively easily accomplish all of that.
And I'm sure it would be a great place just for education if it had all of these things, like go for the fun and the entertainment, but also you're learning about animal rights from all of these rescued animals and what factory farming is like. But then also maybe you learn what it's like to homestead and learn what it's like to maybe prep yourself a little bit or grow your own food.
And learn some tricks at the clown college.
And also the tricks of
because
the
you
clown
might, so biographically, as we move forward, you did go to clown college.
I did.
Lindsay, I didn't know if you knew that or not.
I did look into that because I too spent some time in some clown school.
Oh, yeah? In Florida?
No. It was in my college. We did 2 semesters of clowning. And during that year, all of the people in the program wore the red clown noses around their neck. So that's how you knew we were the seniors in the clown course.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. My whole thing, I had, like I said, this palpable discomfort in my own skin. And everything for me, I would just embrace, like I would take on an identity in something. It started out, the first thing was Little League Baseball. There's something about like me, like I felt defective. I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. I didn't amount to enough. I just wasn't enough. But when I put on that Little League Baseball uniform, like I was a baseball player, and when I was wearing my...
Where was this? Because I can't imagine there's much of a Little League in the UK.
Right. This was when I lived in Miami for grades 1 through half of 4th grade, so 6 to 9. And I would wear my baseball uniform on days when I had no game. Like if I was at the movie theaters, like fully decked out with, the things that go over your socks. Like I thought those things were so cool. And so that was my thing. Then Little League Baseball gave way to heavy metal music, and I listened to heavy metal music at you, like Iron Maiden, Motley Crue, Slayer, that was kind of the trajectory that went on. And I wanted to grow a little mullet, and I'm assuming
this was also in Florida.
That actually I got into the heavy metal in London, England.
Okay.
And then the heavy metal.
When you talk about like listening to like Slayer and having a mullet, I feel like you've just described the Florida state bird.
Right. But then again, that is a global phenomenon. The Florida might have claims to death metal coming out of Tampa, but then heavy metal music gave way to skateboarding. Skateboarding is where I found the video camera, because all skateboarders are going to want to document their achievements and try to get sponsored and all that. Mm-hmm. Skateboarding as an identity, for me to kind of cloak myself in, was actually a highly productive one. And I fell in love with the video camera, skateboarding, determined that I wanted to become a creative advertising person. I thought, man, I love making videos. I could make great commercials. This would be my career. And I went off to the University of Miami to become an advertising guy. But I couldn't bring myself to go to class, and I was wasted, on all the time with the drugs and the alcohol. And I failed out. And so then I thought, okay, now I'm going to become a crazy famous stuntman with my home video camera. I'm going to film just wild stuff and become crazy and famous. And that didn't work very well. I was homeless for 3 years, and about
like homeless as in like
couch surfing, kind of, Like I wasn't so much a live on the streets guy. I was, more of a couch surfer, but homeless nonetheless for 3 years. And then that's when I found out about the clown college, and I thought, I'm not really getting any traction in becoming a crazy famous stuntman. But if I could graduate from clown college, then I would be a trained circus professional, and then people would take me more seriously as a crazy famous stuntman.
I mean, not to make light of going to clown college, but it is kind of funny. Like, I'm going to go to clown college so people will take me serious.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And one of my favorite things about it is that when I was going to clown college, my first cousin, the closest thing I have to a brother, was attending mortician school, and our mothers were just getting hammered together, cracking up, debating whose son was a bigger loser. And they were like really hotly debating, like wanting to lay claim to having the bigger loser.
I mean, I feel like, but what about a hybrid of the two? Because, like, for example, we're all going to die at some point, most likely.
Right.
And the question is, like, what happens then? And why not a hybrid clown mortician, where, like, if I'm going to be dressed up and put in a pine box, I would love to be dressed up like a clown. And like buy a clown and have, and like at the funeral, circus clowns, like funeral clowns who come and, like, you know, maybe even like Weekend at Bernie's style, like me as a dead person, like I'm dressed up like a clown and I'm put on a trapeze, and like it starts off serious, like with the organ music, and then all of a sudden brrr, snare drum, and then like spotlights, and you see me dead on a trapeze dressed as a clown swinging. So I'm just saying, your parents might have seen you guys as losers. I see entrepreneurialism.
I remember having a really dark idea. I've always been very, like, with mortality and death. Like, I've always had this obsession or just weird fanaticism about it. Like, I think it struck me like a long time ago, and I can't believe more people haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about this. But it struck me, we have one instinct in our human experience, which is to survive, and one guarantee, which is we won't. We're not going to survive. That's all that's important to us. So it's like our human experience, it feels like a prank on us, like just a terrible prank. We're in this awful catch-22, and in this sort of dilemma, which we all find ourselves in, I view our objective, if there's like a purpose, it's to somehow wrap our heads around it, you know, to find peace, or to, you know, just some way to deal with our mortality. And, you know, there are three real primary buckets that I think people fall in. There's reproduction. You know, like that's, I think, for most people, like a primary motivation for having children is so that when we die, we live on. You know, the family jewels, the family name, the lineage.
But it's sort of like, so like our confusion and paradox gets handed off to like these innocent children, so they can wrestle with the confusion and the paradox.
Exactly, and you make a good point that it's counterintuitive, but it's also very much built into our.
It's biology.
You know, it's biology.
Driven to want to.
It's biology. Of course, I super don't want to have kids, and I've made sure of that with the vasectomy. Then the second bucket is religion. I mean, it seems that pretty much every religion, that its true purpose is to comfort people about their mortality. You know, you're going to be dead, but it's cool because you're going to go to some wonderful heaven and everything's going to be great.
I've gotten in trouble when I've talked to religious people, and I've described that as marketing. You know, I'm like,
sure.
Because a lot of religion is also predicated on the idea of self-denial.
I thought of the word. I finally got it. Tremendo.
Tremendo. Hey.
Yeah.
Sounds like tremendous.
Yeah, tremendous. Tremendo.
Doesn't mean, hold on, I have to see what the actual
El Stevo es un niño tremendo.
Yeah,
and your mom's like, oh, thank you so much. And then you find out it means devil.
Yeah, tremendo.
Okay.
God, that was killing me.
It's also a great name for a magician clown.
Yeah.
Yeah, it means terrible and frightful.
Yeah, tremendo.
Okay. So we've got reproduction and religion.
Yeah, reproduction and religion. And then there is like the cavemen with the stick figures on the wall. You know, their art. Leave stuff behind that's going to outlive you. And for me, the video camera, from when I first found the video camera with skateboarding, there was two things about it. One, I could edit out all of the fails and really just isolate the successful tricks.
Which is the subtext of what you're talking about, like being uncomfortable in your own skin. And a subtext to that is, I don't want you to see me for who I am. I want you to see me for how I want to be seen.
Right. And the video camera represented a way of being able to manipulate people's perception of me, which is super, super important. And then once perception's been manipulated, there's something so permanent about the video. We're all going to be dead, but videos will live on. You know, and as I failed at the University of Miami and as I was homeless and couch surfing, I knew I couldn't keep a job. I knew that I couldn't go to class, and I just felt I lacked the survival skills to navigate the world, and that as such I was going to die young, having failed miserably at life. And so my life took on this frantic, like kind of packing my message in a bottle. Let me do the craziest stuff, and so that I can become the Van Gogh of the video camera, discover it after, and I'll live forever. And I think that built into that quest was a real frustration with mortality, you know, because like I was making videos where I was like hanging from 12-story balcony railings, like, you know, hanging over certain death by my bare hands, and I would swing out and let go and land on the floor, the 11th floor below. And I would do that super drunk. There's footage of me like very drunk doing that. And it's clear to me on some level that there's like a frustration with mortality, like an anger, like lashing out, taunting it. I was mad at death.
But also what you're describing, because I recognize a little bit of that in myself, there's a playfulness as well.
Yeah.
On one hand, you're like, okay, the universe is baffling. I don't understand anything about my meaning or possible significance. Death waits for all of us. So I'm going to both rail against it.
Yeah.
But also kind of like, you know what? Another response is just that playfulness of like...
Right. I think that's equally valid. You know, I had a really interesting experience. I'll never forget it. While I was at Clown College, there was the Clown College, and it's a little bit erroneous to even consider it a college. It was much more like boot camp. The whole program lasted for 8 weeks.
But I love addressing these sort of like core existential issues.
Sure.
And it's like, okay, what's the response to the human condition, to the existential sort of mystery that we're all confronted with? Is it reproduction? Is it spirituality? Is it materialism? Is it nihilism? No, it's Clown College.
Yeah. For sure.
Which I think is just as valid as any, like you could become a PhD in philosophy.
Oh, and we're absolutely gonna get to a very, very big point here. The Clown College was in Sarasota, Florida, the year that I attended, which actually ended up being the last year of Clown College. They closed it down after my class. And our operating sort of facility was the Sarasota Opera House. And across the street from the Sarasota Opera House was this apartment complex, which was all clowns, all clowns except for one team of marine biology students. So it was just that was the whole thing. It was the clowns, and every Saturday we would put up a show. We would work on a show for the week, and then Saturday we would perform the show, and it was free for all of the residents of Sarasota. So we would just have this experience performing. And then Sunday was the one day off for the week. So the Saturday night after our show, as I did just about every night of the week, I was getting absolutely hammered. And I recall being in the apartment of this female marine biology student. Can't remember if there were other people with us or not, but I was telling this female marine biology student about how we're all going to be dead. We're all going to be dead. But I'm going to live forever because I've got these rad videos. And these videos are going to be playing long after I'm gone, which technically makes me immortal. And this marine biology student just kind of shook her head. She was really mad, but she was kind of sad, just disappointed. She said, God, you think it's all about you? She said, how about this? If I do my job, if I serve my purpose, then every time a fish feeds on a coral reef that I helped to preserve, then I'm still alive. And it was so profound. Like, that's the third bucket, is legacy. I felt myself get goosebumps as I said that, like whatever your legacy is, like what change do you affect? It doesn't have to be like so about me. If I do if I have some kind of cool animal sanctuary that can affect positive change on some level, where there's just so many different ways to have a legacy of positive change. Mm-hmm. But back to the mortality complex, I view what I do. I had somebody ask me recently, is stapling your balls to your leg, is that something that you're proud of? Is that like, and my honest answer is, yeah, big time. And to qualify why I'm so proud of stapling my balls to my leg, I told this interviewer that being human is hard. Being human, like that, I presume being dead is like really easy. But life is hard. And we were talking on my podcast about that's why the life of a dairy cow in a factory farm is the most upsetting proposition, because life is hard.
Because they're kept alive. It's almost like when Lindsay and I have gone to these animal save events where you like bear witness to pigs as they're about to be killed, there's this heartbreaking realization that like death is the only mercy that these pigs are ever going to experience. Like the only cessation to their suffering is going to be death. Like I could almost posit that death is a sign of a merciful God.
Sure.
It sounds like I'm writing a heavy metal song.
Sounds like very PETA too.
Yeah, but like that idea that like, imagine a world without death. Imagine if like the suffering just went on. I'm not in any hurry to die, but I'm grateful that it exists as an end to most organisms' suffering.
Sure. So again, with this interviewer, I said being human's hard. Like life is hard. And on top of that, a lot of people maybe even most people don't love their job. A lot of people aren't happy in their marriages, heaven forbid, with the people who have health problems, like pick your problems and whatever it is. Like, people are really burdened with incredible stressors. And I like to believe, and I really genuinely do believe, that when somebody sees me staple my balls to my leg for that moment.
Except for the police, because you did get arrested for that.
Yeah. You got arrested for that?
Yeah, I cut the same charges: Jim Morrison, Lenny Bruce, 2 Live Crew, felony obscenity.
Oh.
Yeah. See, I just think it's the nanny state, man.
Right.
Like,
so
what sort of world do we live in where a guy can't staple his testicle sack to his leg in front of an audience?
Right, in front of an over 18 audience too. Yeah. But yeah, when people witness me stapling my balls to my leg, for that moment, I genuinely believe that they are not concerned with their problems. That I've effectively distracted them from their problems. And as such, I've given myself the professional title of distraction therapist.
It's almost like a form of like traditional catharsis, like the Greek idea of catharsis. Like by presenting people with your suffering for a moment, their own suffering, they're like, wow, I might be in a loveless marriage. I might hate my job, but at least my ball sack is not currently stapled to my leg.
Well, also, I think a lot of people walk around every single day terrified of pain on any level. They are afraid to do almost anything. And I think more and more as time goes on, pain is to any degree to be avoided at all costs. And I think you've made a career of literally throwing yourself into some of the most painful situations, which I'm sure makes people think like, maybe I'm not made of glass.
Yeah, perhaps. So that's my noble offering.
And I will say, so I love these approaches to the human condition. And I would add, there are a couple of others which could be like materialism. Because for some people, like the Donald Trumps of the world, they're like, oh, as long as I have enough accolades and stuff. In fact, I'd say that materialism seems to be for a lot of people. They're like, if I'm wealthy enough, if I'm famous enough, the human condition won't get me.
Right. I would say that my dad, my parents, if they had a religion, it was money.
And so one of the things that you're also suggesting that reminds me of is the recognition of that central absurdity, and I think of like Andy Kaufman, like one response to that existential question, the human condition, is absurdity. And in a weird way, like having been a former philosophy major, having been a religious studies major, having been a materialist, having been a hedonist, absurdity is a very valid response.
Sure.
Because in a universe that's 15 billion years old, where we're alive for a few decades, that thing you mentioned before, that central paradox of we think our lives have meaning, but there's no way to objectively show that our lives have any meaning or significance.
I submit that the meaning of life is to pick one.
and to, in a way, sort of like try and... The other, I agree. And I would also say, like, one thing I try to remind myself of is, like, most people, not to judge them, they're terrified of the idea that life doesn't have meaning, that life doesn't have significance. And part of our job is to be compassionate towards them and say, like, okay, right. I don't judge your materialism. I don't judge your religious dogma. I understand, because it's being confronted with the void is terrifying for most people. Getting to that point of being like we're maybe all a little bit relaxed in our existential response, and having compassion for people who might not in this go around get to that point. I don't know if that sounds presumptuous on my part or...
I do think, like, the meaning of life is to get off your ass and assign meaning to your life. Mm-hmm. And when perhaps most people's biggest problem is not having identified something in life about which they're truly passionate.
Oh, absolutely. But I have to remind myself of that. And this might sound really obnoxious, but like, I feel like I am blessed with a sense of purpose and love and meaning. Like, I love being in nature. I love working on behalf of animal rights. I love making music. There's so many things that I find meaningful, but like most people don't have that, which I know sounds really obnoxious for me to say that, but like, imagine a life where you're not in love with creative stuff. Of course, the only response is materialism or hedonism or anger or what have you. Like, so how do we fix that? How do we?
I don't know, but with that, I was really struck fairly recently when somebody pointed out that the word enthusiasm, broken down to its roots, you have en theos, which means with God. So the point being that when we are passionate about what we're doing, when we're truly in love with, when we have our purpose, like when we're enthusiastic, we're doing God's work.
Or like, and keeping in mind, I assume that when we talk about God, we're not talking about religion, we're not talking about dogma, we're talking, but it's that idea of life force or spirit or what have you. And I did an interview the other day. The guy was asking me, what's your purpose? And I was like, honestly, to better connect with God, to better know God, to better do God's will with the full understanding, I don't know who or what God is. And I just use it as I could also say spirit of the universe or life force or what have you, but I completely agree that like, that's why I love nature. That's why I love animals. That's why I love creativity and conversation and community is like, it feels like there's a representation of the divine. Fully understanding, I don't know what the divine is, but it just more so than going to, I don't want to malign what people do, but like there feels like certain things have the potential to be sacred and other things less so.
Right. I heard somebody from our secret club at one of our secret...
He's talking about AA.
This guy said in a meeting, he said, and this was a guy who identified as having more than 20 years of sobriety. He said, yeah, I think alcoholics must be the only people arrogant enough to actually believe they understand God. You know, like drawing from the third step, which says God as we understood him. And, and I remember thinking, ooh.
So when I got sober, I was doing my step work, and the third step said, made a decision to turn our life and will over to the care of God as we understood God. And I wrestled with this because apart from my life and will, what do I have? Like turning it over to the care of God as we understood God. And it's like, how do I understand a being that's potentially involved with a 15 billion year old universe? And
I think they've just determined it's 30 billion.
Okay, 30 billion. So, but then the realization I had, which was so liberating, was the God of my understanding is a God that I can't possibly understand. But I do presumptuously feel like I can get glimpses, and I can either sort of like move towards whatever that God is or move away from whatever that God is. And it's just the life's work of trying to move towards the God of my understanding who I don't understand.
Yeah, that's because when I heard this guy say alcoholics, the only people arrogant enough to think they understand God, I had this panic. I was about 2 years sober at the time. We'd been at the Bull Ranch filming Jackass 3D with bulls up in Northern California. I remember thinking, oh my God, like he's right. Like this whole thing that it's all based on a lie, based on thing, like all of this whole 12-step recovery thing is based on understanding God. And that's, and I went into a panic. I went back to my hotel and I called up a friend of mine and I was like, I don't understand God. And that's this all. Like, my friend said, hey, it's okay. I don't understand God either, but I don't have to understand God. I just have to trust God. And that, I love to share that, just changing that one word, just trust, and trust that whatever it is, faith means belief in something that cannot be proven, that everything's, there's underlying intelligence, whatever it is, that helped me a great deal. There's another one too, where if you change one word, and it's the first sentence of chapter 5, how it works. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Initially, that first sentence was written with one word different. And it's rumored to be, they initially wrote it, never have we seen a person fail, but that's not the word. The way that sentence was initially written, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our direction. And I have there's this coffee table book of the original manuscript of the big book, and it's got all the cat scratches and the red. And you can see in that original manuscript, the word direction is crossed out and replaced with the word path. And in changing that one word, the program goes from being a program of telling other people what to do to a program of showing them what you've done yourself. And that's so crucial because nobody wants to be told what to do.
Especially addicts. I mean, no one wants to be told what to do, but especially alcoholics do not want, AA or any 12-step program would have failed in the first 2 months if it was based on telling people what to do.
Right. I remember when I picked my first sponsor, he said, hey man, I'm not here to tell you what to do. He says, I'm not even going to suggest you do anything I didn't do myself. And that was so palatable to me.
One question then is, when did you first discover liquor and drugs, and then what happened that made you decide to give them up?
My mom was very chronic alcoholic, as was every single member of my mom's side of the family. So I grew up with heavy alcoholism right in the house. And I think that's the testimony to how insidious and baffling and just plain insane the disease of alcoholism is, because I had firsthand experience. Like my experience with my mother's alcoholism as a child should have been the most scared straight, I had the education, the firsthand knowledge, the direct experience to know how destructive and awful alcoholism is.
There is an element of we grow up afraid of things. And it seems like a recurring aspect to your life of identify the thing you're afraid of and embrace it.
Perhaps. I remember thinking on some level that all of the alcoholics in the family, despite their best efforts, despite all of their promises, never going to drink again. They always do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's like, no matter what, it gets them anyway. So I'm not even it's going to get me anyway. So I'm not even going to fight it. I'm going to let go and let alcohol.
Yeah.
That's like, that was the deal. Like, oh, well, I mean, this is going to get me anyway. And I understood the disease concept but I never needed anybody to explain it to me, because my mom was a crazy binge drinker. And, she would, when she came off of a binge, it was just, I'm never going to drink again. That's it. That was the last time. And invariably, at some point, I'd come home from school and find my mom drinking. And I'd say, Mom, you said you were never going to do this again. And her answer, she says, I'm only going to have a couple. This time it's going to be different. And so, I remember that as a child. I knew that Mom, even though she was saying this time it's going to be different, I'm only going to have a couple, I knew that was absolute bullshit. And that now here we're going into a dark phase. You know, that disease concept of have one and then the phenomena of craving, whatever you want to call it, just the concept of alcoholism. I knew that without ever needing an explanation.
And do you remember when you had your first drink and how you felt?
I mean, you hear people say that their first drink felt like a warm blanket wrapped. That wasn't my experience. First time, my parents, they had a deal that on New Year's Eve we could have one alcoholic beverage. So I would drink one alcoholic drink on New Year's Eve from pretty alarmingly young age, I think. I certainly remember being 8 and having a drink. My sister would help herself to the liquor cabinet, and I would drink with her. The first time that I ever drank on my own initiative.
Or the first time, because for example, you're reminding me that I actually tried alcohol a few times when I was growing up, and I just realized it never affected me until I went through puberty. And for some reason, like before age 12 or so, I would drink, I would smoke pot, I would do other drugs, but I didn't really like them. But for some reason after puberty, New Year's Eve, Darien, Connecticut, I went to a friend's parents' New Year's Eve party, and I was given a glass of champagne. And I had 3 glasses of champagne, and I was like, oh my God, I never want to not feel this way. This was so perfect. So I wonder, for me at least, there was an age I got to where all of a sudden alcohol affected me physiologically and neurochemically very differently.
Yeah, I don't know, because it's nothing about it makes sense to me. But I remember when I first took the initiative to get drunk on my own, it was to celebrate the 6th anniversary of the formation of Motley Crue.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, exactly. Which was...
Have you had the chance to tell anybody?
Big time. Yeah. They formed in February of 1981. This was February of 1987. And I went, my dad and my parents had a wine cellar, and I took a bottle of red wine and opened it up, and I was living in Toronto. There's a house under construction, a kind of a little bit down the street, across the street. And I went behind there, opened it up, and drank just a little bit, went to school. And then when I came home from school that day, I went back to it and just pounded the whole thing. You know, I really, really pounded the whole thing.
Listening to Shout at the Devil.
I don't know that I was listening to anything, but it was just the Motley Crue instilled in me this idea of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You know, I say that my first Iron Maiden album taught me that I was a metalhead. My first Motley Crue album taught me why I was a metalhead. Mm-hmm. And my first Slayer album taught me how bad the situation really was. So to get from age 11, Motley Crue, I heard Shout at the Devil, and then I was just so drawn to this sex, drugs, and rock and roll, what they described as sleaze, and they just, I just wanted to be like that, from such a young age, I wanted to just party like Motley Crue. So I drink the bottle of wine, and I no question I'm drunk. I come into the house I remember like I called it.
And how old? So 87. How old were you?
I was 12 at that time. I came in. I called up a buddy of mine to tell him I was drunk. I remember he said that you got to go to AA, and I didn't even know it. But I like didn't have the phone did not get back on the hook, so I left the phone off the hook. And I know my parents had been given a gag gift of a breathalyzer. I thought, oh, I'm drunk, so I went and got their breathalyzer out, and I blew into it, and it went, and said drunk, and I put it on.
And you're like, I've arrived.
Yeah, put it on the kitchen counter. Like left it on the kitchen counter. Went upstairs and barfed in the toilet. Didn't flush the toilet.
Oh, and a red wine barf.
Yeah,
too.
red wine barf.
Just like a trail of adolescent
of evidence.
drunkenness.
Yeah, for sure. And I went to this school with the green blazer and tie, and I'm in my clothes and passed out. So my dad came home that evening, and the phone's off the hook. Here's the breathalyzer. It says wasted. He goes upstairs, and his son's passed out on top of, in my school uniform, and the red wine in the toilet, not flushed. And he woke me up. Said, we need to talk. We had our talk over a game of pool, but I beat him at pool, I remember. So that was my first time getting drunk on my own. And I don't remember it being a bad experience or a good experience. It was more of it was less about how it felt than what it represented. Mm-hmm. Like there was like the identity of the spirit of Motley Crue, and the fact that it was motivated literally by Motley Crue was pretty awesome too.
And then fast forward, you got sober when?
March 10th of 2008.
Okay. Yeah, I'm October 8th, 2008.
Yeah.
So roughly,
right.
You beat me by 6 months.
Yeah.
Do you remember your was it like, because some people, for example, have one moment that is their bottom. Other people, like for me, I had like steadily descending years as a bottom. Like when I finally got sober, it wasn't like one specifically bad experience. It was one horrible experience preceded by a few thousand horrible experiences.
Right.
What was yours like?
Well, I had acknowledged that cocaine was a real problem. I was always trying to quit like one thing, but not, definitely not ever. I never tried to stop drinking alcohol. I definitely never tried to stop smoking pot. But cocaine, I would swear it off, or nitrous oxide, I'm not going to do that anymore, or ketamine, or whatever it was. And no matter what my effort was to curtail or to stop, I always failed.
Yeah.
I always failed.
As it should be.
Yeah, and so in my own experience trying to address my issues with drugs and alcohol, I understood the concept of powerlessness. So once I had the intervention, it was Johnny Knoxville and Jeff Tremaine and the bunch of the crew of Jackass came over, like 8 guys, and they were there to lock me up on a 5150. And they had the...
Can you explain a 5150? Because a lot of people... I know, Lindsay, you know what that is.
It's
I do, for
a 72-hour-long involuntary psychiatric hold, which is enforceable by law if somebody is deemed to be harmful to themselves or others.
I didn't know what that was before I got sober, but obviously going to AA meetings in New York and LA, you hear a lot of talk about 5150s.
What's it called in New York?
I forget. But it's the same thing, like an involuntary hold,
yeah,
basically.
Which aren't legal everywhere. 5150
is a California term. That's the California code. In Florida, the equivalent is called a Baker Act. Then I think in Pennsylvania, I want to say it's a Marchman. I'm not sure, but they have different versions. Different versions of the law. But yeah, so they had me. I qualified because I had sent a mass email saying that I was ready to die and I was gonna jump out of this window, and so I qualified, and they got me locked up for 5150. And I was such an unlovely creature when they got me to the hospital, to the psych ward. I was spitting on people. I was trying to throw furniture around. I was unlovely. and they changed my status from 5150, which is a 72-hour hold, to a 5250, which is a 2-week hold. And that was the saving grace, because 3 days would not have done the trick. Because I think it was like day 4 that a panel of AA dudes came into the psych ward and told their stories. And
I used to speak at Bellevue at a detox.
I mean, I can describe my my first 3 steps, which distinctly happened in that psychiatric ward. It was the Thalians psychiatric ward at Cedars-Sinai Hospital. There was a guy, I don't know what day I was on in there, but there was another patient in the psych ward who identified himself as a heroin addict. He said, I've got this book for you. I think you really need it. And it was the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I remember thinking that it was kind of odd that a heroin addict was giving me a book about alcoholism, telling me that he really cared about me when we were both on suicide watch in a psychiatric ward. But going back to my experience with my family and everybody, like, despite their best efforts, despite their most sincere promises, they always drank again. Like, I just felt that I felt that I was just resigned to a life and death, because it was just too, like, nobody could beat it. Got everybody, and it just got them down. And like, I had conceded defeat, you know, like. And on top of that, you know, I was so entitled, undisciplined. I recognized these things about myself. I had no discipline. I was super entitled, just used to getting what I wanted. Like there's no way. And I considered myself a write-off. I thought, like, well, if there's any point where there was hope for me, I'm past that point. Like, I am a lost cause. That was my core belief about it.
So Lindsay, because when I hear that, I'm like, yeah, it makes sense.
Right.
Because I felt the exact same way. But I'm wondering, like, because Lindsay, you're not an addict. When you hear someone say that they almost self-diagnosed as a lost cause, like, oh, best case scenario, I'm going to drink and do drugs until I die, which hopefully will be pretty soon. How do you feel when you hear that?
I mean, I think a lot of people have moments where they feel like, I'm a lost cause and why should I even try? I think that is a common human thing of, I can't get better. I'm just going to do what I can with what I have, not necessarily regarding substances, but regarding a partner they have that beats them up. And they're like, I'm not going to find something better.
Or health issues or job stuff. Yeah.
Or, you know, any situations like situational things, or even like, I have habits that I can't stop. I overeat. I undereat. I don't do anything with my life, and I'll never change. I'm a write-off. Right. I think that there are versions of that aren't necessarily connected to substance. Yeah, that's what it makes me think of. But that is so direct. But also, it's outside of you. You know, it's not like this thing, but it's a habit coming from the inside, I guess.
I mean, like, towards the end of my drinking, I got to that point of like, okay, I've given up on myself, but there was something lovely and comforting there.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay. Like, about 6 months before I got sober, I was going to buy a dive bar. I'd actually had drawn up the papers and was on the verge of buying a dive bar in Brooklyn. And I thought I was so clever. It was going to be called Slow Dive, but the V was going to be, it was going to be a neon sign that said Slow Dive, but the V wasn't going to work. It's going to be Slow Die. And I was going to renovate it so I would live in the basement. But I thought this was a great idea. I was like, okay, and I'll go in there. I'll wake up at 5 p.m. and I'll start drinking and I'll start doing drugs and I'll go to sleep at 8 or 9 in the morning in my basement crypt. And I'll do this for a few years until I die. And it seemed like a great idea.
Wow.
And as you describe it, it sounds awesome.
That's why, Lindsay, I love your perspective, because I was like, it's so weird that, like, in the world of addiction, you're like, oh yeah, like living in a basement and waking up at 5 p.m. until you die is like the best thinking I have.
Sounds completely awesome too. I remember when there was the movie about Amy Winehouse that came out, and I saw that in the theater.
I've heard it's brutal.
It was the most brutal thing ever. It was the most brutal, like horrific display of addiction. And I remember walking out of the theater just feeling like I just was so triggered. I wanted to get high.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like that's the insanity. That's the insanity. Here I was presented with the most horrific display of the destruction of addiction, and it just.
But also, you grew up with a display of addiction.
Right.
I mean, there's things about me in my life that I know are bad habits that are based off of bad habits I saw growing up, and there's something so familiar and warm about things I was taught that were so harmful to the person that was teaching them to me, and yet the familiarity of it makes me want to go back into bad habits. You know.
Right. So back to the psych ward. I believe, my core belief is that I'm a lost cause. I'm a write-off. There's no hope for me. So, you know, I accept this book, this Alcoholics Anonymous book from the heroin addict, you know, as an exercise in being polite, you know, like, and I've got my little room in the psych ward, and I've got the book there. But then, whether it was that night, the next night, I don't know, but I was confronted with insomnia. I just could not fall asleep, and I had absolutely nothing better to do than to read the Alcoholics Anonymous book. And I could not have been more clear that no part of me was opening up this book to find a solution for my alcoholism. I was literally just killing time because I had nothing better to do. So, to start from the beginning, the first thing is called the doctor's opinion. And in the doctor's opinion, it's describing the powerlessness of alcoholism, the inability to choose, the hopelessness, you know, that it even specifically describes hopeless alcoholics that were determined to die, then became sold on the ideas in this book and went on to become the finest specimen of man you could ever hope to meet. And somehow, like, my interpretation of that, and it to this day, my interpretation of that was that, what it's describing is that the worse the case of the alcoholism, the worse off, the more of a candidate you are for recovery. In retrospect, that very core belief that I was a write-off, that I was a lost cause, that I was hopeless, that I was just, you know, that is the first step. That in my believing that there was no hope for me, that I was a lost cause, that is precisely the admission. We admitted that we were powerless over alcohol. So my first step. So that was like, and there's so many of these paradoxes in recovery. Like, we find hope in hopelessness. We find
strength and powerlessness. Yeah.
Strength and powerlessness. Victory and surrender. Comfort and discomfort.
Yeah.
Like, there's, I mean, it
self-interest through service.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great one. So that was my first step, and I think I acknowledged it as such, but that didn't bring about willingness. It just brought about acknowledgement. It occurred to me that the book was describing me as a candidate for recovery because that hopelessness is actually an asset. And then I believe it was the next day, maybe it was the day after, the panel of guys, the three members of Alcoholics Anonymous came into the psych ward to tell their stories, not because they were in trouble and had to do it, not because they were being paid or benefiting from it, but they were just doing it just to come in and just do it. And again, I had absolutely nothing better to do in that psych ward than to go and listen to these guys. I wouldn't, like, were I not locked up in a psych ward, I never would have read that book, never would have opened my mind to go listen to people tell their story of AA. But I went in there, and I remember the three guys. I remember them not being the kind of guys that I would, you know, party with or associate with, but as they each described their disease, they're using it, you know, I could tell that they weren't bullshitting, you know. Like they described having suffered from alcoholism and addiction in a way that I related to, that I believed. And then they went on to describe their program of recovery and like there's something with step 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Came to believe. So there's something, they came to believe in the power greater of ourselves. What we're talking about is faith. Yeah, there's no way around it. Step 2 is about faith. Mm-hmm. And the way that I described my step 2, not even realizing that that's what was happening, was that I knew these guys weren't bullshitting me when they described being alcoholics and addicts. I knew I could see with my own eyes that they were clean and sober. There was evident what they were talking about was real. So I came to believe that what they were describing as their program of recovery, what they do to stay sober, that it works for them. And it didn't require any blind faith on my part to believe that what they were talking about worked for them, because I could see that it worked for them. So I came to believe that their AA business worked for them. And I could argue it would be impossible for me to have come to believe that their program of recovery worked for them and not believe that it could work for me. So that was me. I came to believe that what these guys were talking about helped them and that it could be the solution for me. And then after they told their stories, then they started giving out pamphlets and this and that. They had the 20 questions of Alcoholics Anonymous, which I find really hilarious. Like 20 questions. They say, like, if you answer one yes, then there's a good chance you're an alcoholic. If you answer like 2, then yeah, like.
If you answer 3, you're dead.
Yeah. I mean, dude, I had a couple that I believe I could have argued were not applicable to me due to my special circumstances in life. But otherwise, I just completely fucking aced the test. I mean, those 20 questions absolutely painted me into a corner. Like, so I was confronted with, like, at first I thought there's nothing that could be done. That was my step 1. Then my step 2 is I realized, there is something that can be done. And then step 3 with those 20 questions, I was like, and I have to do it. I was just painted into a corner. And I remember just thinking, God, this fucking sucks. And I got to do this. And then there was my step 3. Was where I was just like, fuck, man, like, and I got to do this. And I remember my decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood them was just as simple as I got to do what these guys just described that they do. And that journey for me is going to begin with going into a rehab. So I turned my will and my life over to the care of Las Encinas Hospital, which at the time, my buddy Dr. Drew was the director of the chemical dependency unit. I remember showing up there and saying to Dr. Drew.
Wait, were you on that show Celebrity Rehab?
He was trying to get me on there.
Because Celebrity Rehab, when I first got sober, I all of a sudden had a lot of free time and I got to start watching TV again.
Yeah.
So I ate a lot of cereal and I watched a lot of TV, and I watched Celebrity Rehab, which was very entertaining, like Shifty Shell Shock smoking crack on the roof of the rehab. But I do remember watching it thinking, maybe I don't have as much of a problem as I thought I did.
I used to watch Intervention to make myself feel better about my situation. Yeah. And thank God I didn't fall for that. They kept like increasing the numbers of money that they were throwing at me to get me to do that. I'm really glad I did.
So since then, so that was roughly 15 years ago.
Yeah, a little over 15 years ago.
So you just had your 15-year anniversary. Yeah. Congratulations. In those 15 years, have you been tempted to go back out?
There was a time when Charlie Sheen was doing his whole Tiger Blood thing, and like he got on Twitter, like had like 1 million Twitter followers overnight, announced that he was going on like some Torpedo of Truth tour, sold out like properly massive theaters on like one tweet. And I remember just thinking, dude, this guy's like fucking out of control. He's the fucking most famous guy in the world right now. He's just sold out a huge fucking theater tour with one tweet. I was like, man, if I got fucking loaded, I could really.
So the career expediency of relapsing. Yeah.
Right, like, I mean, and how funny is that? Because once again, like, confronted with the most horrific display of the destruction of addiction, it looks like a good idea to me.
Yep.
Like, yeah. I mean, there were a few times I just thought, oh man, I'd get a lot of attention if I just said, fuck it.
But then it's not, it has diminishing returns.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And actually, I wrote about that in my second book, which I fully acknowledge it, you know. But this is particularly pertinent, your point about how entertaining celebrity rehab was. There's nothing inherently entertaining about recovery. It's just like entertaining television programming and meaningful recovery, mutually exclusive. Mutually
It does seem weird that someone had the idea of like, okay, we're going to take people at their darkest, most vulnerable moments, and we're going to monetize it.
Right. And the concept of that, I mean, it's just so based on like the crashing and burning and the salaciousness of the disease. Like the actual recovery part is really the boring part, you know? So again, I'm really glad that I didn't fall for the celebrity, that I didn't go for the celebrity rehab thing. I also think that there's a legal question about whether people can sign the binding contracts agreeing to be on it, considering the shape that they're in.
Yeah.
So, but one thing about the second step, it's the only language in the 12 steps I take issue with is when it says return to sanity. And I was like, but I've never been sane.
Right.
Like, how can I become sane again?
Restore us to sanity.
Like, I can't be restored to something I never experienced. Like, I've been mentally ill and dysfunctional probably since before I was born.
I agree with that. That wasn't one that I particularly took issue with, but yeah, you sold. You got me on that one. The problem I have with the language in the 12 steps is on step 4. We made a fearless
and searching inventory
and searching moral inventory.
Oh yeah,
like the word fearless in there just seems to suggest that this 4th step is something that we should be afraid of. Like why would I have to be fearless about it if
even though it is
not
terrifying, it's having Lindsay, have you done that?
Scary. I have, and I was afraid because I had to look at things I was terrified to look at, which is why I was engaging in the addictive behaviors to begin with, is to avoid looking at the scary things.
Right. Okay. And then a moral inventory. Like,
the moral part does seem very sort of early 20th century.
Yeah.
So the words fearless and moral to me suggest that it's an exercise that I should be afraid of, and that it's got something to do with how I'm a bad person. And I think I particularly feel that way because my first approach to the 4th step was just kind of like, okay, now I'm gonna make an inventory. I'm gonna write down a big list of what makes me a terrible person. You know, like
it's a leading thing. It says you're gonna be afraid, and you're gonna write
and they
down
even call
why
them
you're
personality defects.
Right.
Which is definitely language wise. Like I feel like they could come up with something better than personality defects.
So I had a thing, and at the top of the page I wrote icky guilt. You know, just the things just the icky, terrible things I had to confess to. And in the 12 and 12, it talks about many of us balked at this moral inventory, and we, pride in reverse and self-loathing, and I basically just kind of put down all the reasons why I thought I was a terrible person, all of the evidence of me being a moral just piece of shit. And by the time I got done with it, I remember going through it with my sponsor and thinking, like, man, I don't understand how people can say they do their 5th step and they feel a weight lifted off their shoulders. Like, I just feel like the worst, terrible piece of shit. Like, I can't forgive myself. And I ended up with the 4th step blues in psych ward number 2, which I actually turned myself into because I was like, I fucking just feel suicidal. Like, I fucking hate myself. Like, I'm a piece of shit, and I can't forgive myself for what a piece of shit I am.
That's also one of the paradoxes of AA.
Right,
Is like,
yeah.
I'm not just a loathsome piece of shit. I'm the most loathsome piece of shit of all times. Like the sort of I definitely suffered from that of like almost like nihilistic narcissism.
Sure. Yeah. The biggest piece of shit the world ever revolved around.
I'm the best piece of shit that the world has ever seen.
And I took it to crazy. Like, oh yeah, this is all about God. Well, like I can't respect any God that would forgive me.
Yeah. It's a Groucho Marx thing. I never want to belong to any club that would have me as a member.
Right. So having had that experience and spent another 3 weeks in psych ward number 2, I look back on it and I think, for me, when I take people through the steps, I say like the 4th step inventory is we're making it. We're gonna list as many examples as we can think of things that make us uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. We're gonna, and there's really 3 buckets that discomfort is gonna land in. We're not comfortable when we feel angry and, resentful. So, and we're not comfortable when we're gripped by fear, when we're terrified, and we're not comfortable when we feel guilty. So there's the anger list, the fear list, and the guilty list. And so the purpose of this isn't to determine whether we're good or bad, or whether we, it's not supposed to be scary. We're just gonna make example. We're gonna come up with as many examples of things that make us uncomfortable as we can, so that we can look at them and figure out how to protect ourselves from being uncomfortable.
It becomes more actionable instead of just a pity party. It becomes here's things I can actually heal and fix.
Right. So maybe if instead of saying a fearless and searching moral inventory of ourselves, if it said, we made a thorough inventory of things that made us uncomfortable and took a new approach, or
and saw how they might not have been based on reality as well.
Right. Yeah.
So it's now less self-flagellating and more evolution.
So before we say goodbye and let you go on to your fun day, there are a couple of quick things I wanted to bring up. One, after your metal period, did you in fact have a sort of punk rock period, or did they overlap?
Big time.
Okay.
The heavy metal gave way to punk rock, and that was punk rock initially being the sort of a soundtrack to skateboarding.
Yeah. So then quick, fun, lightning round. Top 5 punk rock bands of all time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Favorite.
Gorilla Biscuits is a big deal for me.
Yeah, we talked about like Cats and Dogs.
Yeah.
Yep.
Gorilla Biscuits, Bad Brains. I mean, just as like it's so ingrained in my youth. Misfits, I'm gonna count them.
Oh, you have your Alfred E. Newman Misfits tattoo.
This is a totally different one, but how many punk rock band acronyms? MDC, JFA,
DRI, GBH. Yeah, that's a good one. Punk rock band acronyms. They're so like
RKL.
I don't know RKL.
Oh, Rich Kids on LSD.
Okay, no, I didn't know that.
They're great.
Okay.
There's so many of them.
Yeah, because there was a lot of people went from like punk rock to metal, and then some people went from metal to punk rock. Okay, so then favorite metal bands. You mentioned Iron Maiden, you mentioned Motley Crue. I mean, Iron Maiden, as weird as this is going to sound, I don't want to get in trouble with Maiden fans. I never really saw them as being metal. Like, to me, they're sort of like British hard rock in the sort of like...
No, they're definitely metal. Then I'm going to go back to the best punk. I don't know why I keep leaning towards SNFU. But I don't. I'm not giving them
any of the like early like Circle
Fugazi.
Okay.
I'll go Fugazi big time, and Fugazi over Minor Threat too.
Really?
I think so.
Wow, I can. Because Minor Threat were so profoundly important to me when I love Fugazi.
Yeah.
But like Minor Threat, it was the first time I'd ever seen punk rock kids who looked like me. And who, like, it was the first American hardcore. I was like, oh, they're like they're wearing jeans and t-shirts and sneakers and hoodies. And so am I. Like, there was such a sense of identity when I saw like the picture of them sitting on the steps at Discord House.
So then I just need one more.
Gorilla Biscuits, Bad Brains,
Misfits,
Fugazi.
Yeah.
I can see you sort of like mentally going through your record collection right now.
Yeah, for sure. You know, like this is not even gonna count, but you know, a band that have you ever heard of Fire Hose?
Yeah. Mike Watt, right?
Yeah. Did I tell you about how I go on a trip and I'll just listen to one album on a loop? I did that with Fire Hose with their first 2 albums for my 3 weeks in the UK. Just those two albums.
I think that would count because Mike Watt was in the Minutemen, right?
Oh, I didn't even know that.
I think Mike Watt was in the Minutemen. For a while, I thought he was in Husker Du, but I think he was in the Minutemen. And obviously, the Minutemen were legendary punk rockers. So, like, I feel like anything that comes from the world of hardcore is still like hardcore by adjacency.
Yeah. DRI made me really happy too.
So, Lindsay, DRI stands for Dirty Rotten Imbeciles, and they were one of the first bands who sort of moved into the metal realm. They were legendary for having the shortest shortest songs. Like,
ooh, Descendants.
Yeah, Milo Goes to College.
Where are they at in my list?
They're still touring. Descendants are still out there. But DRI...
I think I'm going to swap out DRI with Descendants.
Okay.
Just because Descendants, I feel, is just somehow more meaningful.
The songs are a little more composed. Like DRI would play a show with 30 songs, and it would be 18 minutes long.
Wow. Yeah. Every day gets a bit slimmer.
Yeah. Well, I would love to both come and hang out with you and the 1,000 rescued animals, and also maybe like do some circus tricks on stage. Keeping in mind, I don't know how to do circus tricks, but you can.
I can teach you. I can teach you some cool tricks. And,
not slice my tongue open with a razor blade.
Right.
Last time I saw you perform at a fundraiser a couple years ago.
Okay.
And on stage you sliced your tongue open with a razor blade, and it
was broken glass.
Okay.
I broke a light bulb over my head.
And then cut your mouth with it.
As you do.
Naturally. What else would you do for a fundraiser?
The tongue is the fastest healing organ. It stops bleeding right away, and you got like...
Yeah.
There you go.
My Nikki Sixx, my Tommy Lee.
Lindsay, any last minute?
Well, I wonder if we should talk, because I know you've done a couple of comedy specials. You've written some books. Are you going to do either of those things again? Or are you going to do something?
I just taped my 3rd comedy special in London.
Amazing.
And it is absolutely the crown jewel of my entire career. I could not be more thrilled about it.
Wow, congratulations.
For this 3rd comedy special, I really genuinely believe that my stand-up has caught up to my stunts. And It's a multimedia affair which brings all of my worlds together.
So you've got video, you've got stunts, you've got stand-up.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
And because it's a multimedia show, my lady is the production designer. She came up with the idea of, well, it's a multimedia show, and after each bit in the act, you play, footage of the story happening. So she came up with the idea to build a wall of retro TV sets behind me. Amazing. Well over 100 TV sets, all of them fully functional.
And when and where is this being released?
It's particularly naughty, so I don't think it's going to be allowed. I think it's going to be direct to consumer.
Well, something I saw was that your last special you self-released, which is what we did for Punk Rock Vegan Movie, is self-released, and it's an amazing pathway to being able to say exactly what you want to say and connect directly to the people that are interested in whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I was super thrilled with.
She did this?
Yeah.
She designed that? Look at that. It's really cool.
Yeah,
and the bleeding roses?
Yeah, the bleeding roses are sick. That's amazing. What's her name?
Yeah, Lux.
Lux?
Not Lux Interior. That was the singer for the Cramps.
Yeah. But yeah, so that should come out in October, I think, unless there's this other project which takes precedence and pushes it down the line.
That's amazing. I can't wait to see it.
Well, this has been wonderful because I know, just as a recap, we first sort of met
in Russia.
So, Lindsay, here's a funny little story. I was getting ready to go to bed at my hotel in St. Petersburg, and around 1 a.m. or so, I get this call from Johnny Knoxville and Stevo saying, like, "Hey, Moby, it's the Jackass guys. We're or the Wild Boys, I forget whom.
Yeah.
We're in the lobby. Come hang out with us." And this was before we were sober, and a 7-hour drunken lunatic crawl through St. Petersburg ensued. And I think one of the next times I saw you was cutting your tongue open on stage with broken glass from a. And I started seeing you at AA meetings.
Yeah.
Like, I love that we've gotten the chance to like get to know each other like this. It's really...
I do too, man. I worship your music. I genuinely fucking love your music.
Well, thank you.
And every once in a while, I feel really strongly that music will come out of my shuffle, like with some divine purpose. And it was very recently where I'm sure that I had it on shuffle, but somehow my phone just switched over to nothing but Moby. And I felt that I was like, man, I really want to talk to Moby, and we reached out to get you on the podcast after that happened.
I'm thrilled that God was controlling your Pandora shuffle.
Yeah, it wasn't even Pandora. It was just what I have downloaded in my my iMusic. But yeah, it's been a joy, and reach out anytime, man. I
want to come over and visit the goats.
Come visit the goats.
Lindsay, can I try a skateboard thing?
Yeah, 100. I mean, maybe holding on to something.
Holding on to the rings.
Yeah.
I'm shocked that my little gymnastics rings help her out, or like with skateboarding. I did it on my tour bus. I mounted gymnastics rings to the ceiling inside the bus. So
that's a business right there.
Yeah, I mean,
so just installing like Stevo's own like
gymnastic rings everywhere.
It's so anti-Stevo.
You can install.
So you don't get hurt when you're doing stuff.
Yeah, but install them in the shower, install them in the bedroom, and install them in the subway.
From room to room to room.
We start building the ramp Wednesday of next week.
Okay.
And about that time, I get the initial line cut for this multimedia comedy special.
Really exciting.
And today is my first day shooting the first vignette for my next tour.
Wow.
My next tour is going to tell the story of how I'm confronting middle age and lashing out at Father Time. So today
that's great. I will be front row for that one.
And so one quick thing to end on is how remarkable, because none of this amazing stuff would be happening if you were still out there drinking and doing drugs.
Sure.
Right now, I sometimes like to think like, okay, if you and I had gone out drinking and doing drugs last night, we'd probably be like passed out, hungover, sick, asleep, gobbling Xanax and Vicodin just to feel better, and like 5 p.m, getting up and feeling sick and disgusting, as opposed to like playing with goats, building a half pipe. Do they call them half pipes?
Yeah, it's a mini ramp, a mini half pipe.
I just like to sound like I sort of know what I'm talking about.
And now I'm off to go see how it works, trying to do a backflip off the roof of a moving car.
Okay. Excuse me? God.
Will, on that note, we'll say goodbye. Hopefully not for the last time.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, that was unexpected and fun and lovely.
Yeah, I love being surprised.
Me too.
But I also love showing sides of people that the general public might not assume are even there. Mm-hmm. As we said at the beginning, like no one would expect this crazy stuntman, clown college graduate to be so thoughtful and introspective. I love that we're able to have these conversations. And so thank you to Stevo for coming on and giving us so much of his time, and for being such a thoughtful, funny, kind person.
And for leaving, I'm walking away from this conversation with Stevo feeling so inspired to see someone who has, he's always put himself out there in so many amazing and notable ways, but to see him having this hard time and have given up on himself and have turned his life around and care about himself and the world around him so much, to make that change from helplessness to empowerment is so beautiful and encouraging, and it makes me really happy to see him living that.
Yep. And my hope is that at some point relatively soon we can go visit him and his partner on their gigantic sanctuary and visit 1,000 rescued animals. I'm curious to know how you ever will have 1,000, but maybe 1,000 rescued animals on a sanctuary with a nuclear bunker and a clown performing college area could be achievable and fantastic.
It's the kind of operation I think I've been longing for my whole life.
In fact, maybe we won't, once he has his gigantic animal sanctuary nuclear apocalypse bunker, we might just visit and never leave.
That's kind of my secret plan. Thank you so much to you for listening, listener. You make this worth it. And when you respond and let us know what you think about the episode at mobypod@moby.com, it really makes our day. So please keep up the conversation with us on email. It is very meaningful. I also want to thank Jonathan Nesvadba, who masterfully edits these podcasts and does the music production on them. And I want to thank Human Content for getting this podcast out into the worldwide app web.
And so thank you, everyone, and we will see you very soon.
Bye-bye.